Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. Hi Jason, your thoughts on elevated heels when squatting? Omar Surfclam recently did a video on it in relation to lifting shoes. I've never had any trouble hitting depth, but gave it a go and felt a lot smoother, kinder on my back, but my knees click like a mofo. Any advantages/disadvantages? No, I think squatting shoes are fantastic overall for high bar squatters, also known as Olympic squatters. Not necessarily for low bar. Low bar, that's going to be a point of contention. A lot of people are going to debate that, but I think because of the wider stance, it might not be ideal for your knee joints. So if you're hearing the clicking in your knees, I don't know if it's just the new mobility, you're getting used to it, and the fluid in there popping. Or if it's an issue because you're doing a serious low bar squat. But what I would recommend to you is that if you are going to try it with a low bar squat, use a very non-aggressive shoe. Like for me, you guys, if you recall when I was squatting, and I still have my squat shoes, I used Adidas AdiPowers. They have a fairly aggressive heel as far as the height of the heel goes. There are other shoes that have a less aggressive heel, such as like the Adidas weightlifting shoes actually have a less aggressive heel. Start with a less aggressive one, because I would be concerned about the knees a little bit with doing that, so it could be a concern. But I think overall, as far as reaching depth, hip mobility, everything else, elevated heeled shoes are a must, but they need to be proper shoes. Don't just do something half-ass or jerry rig something, because you really need a shoe that's properly designed for it, that's stable, that's not going to shift or move under a heavy load, which is also why people who put plates under their heels are complete idiots, or a board under their heel, because they're doing something that's not stable just to get that extra depth. And so a lot of bodybuilders and stuff do that because they don't seem to understand there are shoes made specifically for this, and it's not a good idea to do something else, because if that plate shifts or moves or something goes wrong, you're going to potentially injure yourself, and getting set up can potentially injure you as well. So please remember, when we talk about the elevated heel thing, we're not talking about standing on something. We're talking about using shoes with a hard heel built in that's designed to stay together and not be damaged when under load. And a good pair of shoes is worthwhile if you're going to do this. So please, guys, don't stand on plates or on blocks. It's just really stupid to do that, and you run the risk of hurting yourself for minimal benefit. But a good pair of shoes, yeah, absolutely, will make a world of difference. It's one of the few lifting devices I do recommend, because you guys notice I don't even train with a belt. So yeah, I think it's fine. Just again, if you're going to low bar squat, use the least aggressive heel you can find. And plenty of guys low bar squat just fine in chucks, and have for many, many years. So may not be as necessary for that style of squat. All right, next question. Are box squats a suitable alternative to regular squats to develop strength/power? I don't compete in powerlifting, so is there a need to practice getting out of the hole? The box is set to allow a knee flexion slightly greater than 90 degrees, and I find the slight pause on the box great for initiating an upward drive while maintaining solid form. Yeah, box squats are fine for that. I tend to advocate the high bar squat for most people, because I feel it gives better overall athleticism, and because it allows you to train the stretch reflex, the myotatic reflex, and you can't get that as well on the box squat. But if you're simply uncomfortable with a standard squat and you're choosing to use a box squat for whatever reason, yeah, it's perfectly fine, other than, again, it requires extra work to set up a box. You have to have access to a box, everything else. And there is a risk of injury involved with it. What you need to be aware of when you do the box squat, make sure that you don't ever hit the box hard. And that's one of the downsides of it, is that it does add an extra risk component. And oftentimes people do it because they just simply are uncomfortable squatting without a box. It's that fear of falling back, and a lot of people struggle to get over that. But as far as the squat itself being a good exercise, yeah, the box squat's fantastic. It's been a mainstay for many strength athletes over the years, including competitive powerlifters. And if that's what you choose to do, and that's what you enjoy doing, I would rather see you doing that than not doing a heavy squat at all. So definitely keep doing it. No problem with it there. Just again, be aware of the risk of injury by hitting the box too hard. You need to remember to make a soft touch to the box and then sit back and then come back up through the heels instead of hitting the box hard. And just always be aware that when you go with a heavy weight, sometimes there's always that risk you're going to hit that box harder. So that being said, it would be in your best interest too, when you start using a modestly heavy weight, is you probably need to put pads on top of that box, which means you're going to need an even lower box to get on so those pads can compress, and that will also make it a safer exercise for you. Another little pro tip, make sure that you're turning the box at a diagonal so the point goes between your feet. It's going to give you a lot more safe contact with the box when you come down because the box will be further under you and then your legs clear it easier. So just a couple tips with it. So hopefully that answered your questions. All right, next question. Hey Jason, you discussed in your Tracy Anderson video that running isn't really all that good for your knee joints. For the general population who do choose to run for cardio, would you advise them to incorporate leg training into their routine in order to strengthen the joints and decrease the risk of long-term damage? Thanks. Well, I would hope they're already doing leg training with weights, because if they don't, they're missing out all the health benefits of strength training, which actually has more total health benefits than the running does. So I would really hope that they are. But to answer the question, yes, they do need to incorporate leg training, and because they're doing a lot of running, they need to make sure that they don't develop, number one, quad dominance, and number two, they need to make sure that they keep their knee joint more stable. So the best thing they could be doing is not only obviously doing exercises for the quads like the squat or leg press, preferably the squat, but they need to make sure that they're putting a lot of emphasis on their posterior chain. So a lot of deadlifts, glute ham raises, things like that. They need to make sure that they're putting a very strong emphasis there, because the best thing that they can do to avoid injury as far as their weight training goes is going to make sure that they do not become quad dominant. So posterior chain, so glutes and hamstrings become an enormous priority, particularly those hamstrings, because if they do that, they're going to have a much more stable knee joint. They're going to have a more secure knee joint, and they're less likely to damage their knees doing the running. You combine a lot of good solid hamstring hypertrophy work and strength work combined with picking really good shoes, the proper shoes for running, and their chances of having a knee injury go down dramatically, and it makes it a much, much safer way to train. All right, next question. Hi Jason, please tell me what you consider the best tricep isolation exercise with the least impact on the joints and how to execute it safely. It's not comfortable for me to do dips. Thanks. Well, you need to keep in mind you might not need to isolate the triceps. If you're doing closed grip presses and overhead presses, your triceps might be pretty well covered for most people's purposes. But if you feel that you need a tricep exercise and you're concerned about tendonitis, again, inflammation in the connective tissue around the elbow where the triceps insert, or elbow inflammation, the best exercise that I can possibly recommend would be dumbbell skull crushers, but with two things to keep in mind. Number one, you need to keep your hands in a fully pronated position, which means your palms facing each other. So you think of it as a hammer grip. So again, skull crushers laying down, and you need to make sure that you bring the dumbbells all the way back behind your head on every rep, so that you have extension of the shoulder as you go, so that you're not just moving the elbows. So the main thing you're looking at is to make sure that when your elbows are fully bent and the dumbbells are down, that the dumbbells are behind your head, because it's that position to where when you have laying down, your upper arm is 90 degrees from the floor, meaning the upper arm, meaning the part where the tricep and the bicep are. When that's 90 degrees from the floor, or from your body, and you have full flexion of the elbow happening there, the elbow is fully bent, that's what actually causes the inflammation on that connective tissue there. So you need to avoid that. So again, that exercise done that way is the one exercise I can think of that is the least negative impact on your connective tissue or elbow joint itself as far as any single isolation movement goes for the tricep. So give that a try. All right, next question. If you skip a day of training, is it optimal to continue with progression or simply move on? For example, you were meant to hit a 65% intensity deadlift. Should you skip and continue up to 70% or complete the 65% set? All right, you need to look at it this way. If you're on any given program and you're scheduled to hit certain exercises in a certain sequence, you need to do them in that same sequence. Meaning, if you had a program that has you run from workout to workout a 60% intensity, 65%, 70, 75, 80, going over on different workouts, you don't want to skip. If anything, all you did by missing a workout is give yourself a little bit more recovery time, a little more time to adapt, so you're more likely to be successful on the next lift unless you went so long that you detrained. Now, if it required you to take 2 weeks away from an exercise, you're going to regress. But if you were doing this Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you hit your Monday, you miss your Wednesday, you need to do your Wednesday workout on Friday. And you just need to chalk it up to a loss and just pick up the schedule where you left off due to the missed day. Don't skip days in a structured program, because if you do, you're going to miss part of the sequence and you're not going to progress the same. So yeah, you need to follow the program as written, and any days that you miss, you need to just move the program forward to actually do the day that you missed on the next workout, and your whole workout itself needs to move forward one whole day. So that's just the way it is. So if you're doing a, whatever it is, if you're doing a split routine, push pull, or upper lower, you're going to actually have to change your upper lower days in the following weeks until you get it all sorted back out, because ideally you want to follow that same structure if you're running any sort of written periodized program, because it's intended to be run that way, and you're going to actually miss some of the benefits if you skip workouts. So remember, a miss just means that you move that day forward and do that day anyways. All right, next question. I know one can out-train a bad diet in those extreme circumstances, but can someone out-diet a bad diet? Say someone is adamant about eating plenty of vegetables, 9 to 10 servings a day, and then fills out the rest of their calories up with foods like burgers, pizza, pie, and cake. Would they still see the negative health effects of a bad diet? All right, great question. And you know what? That's entirely dependent upon a number of factors. Now, if you're talking about just the empty calorie aspect, that's usually our biggest concern, is that people are eating a lot of low satiety, empty calories without getting all their vitamins, minerals, and satiation, fiber, things like that. Now, if you have someone who's sitting there eating 800 calories of mixed vegetables every day, and then they fill up the rest of their diet with junk when they're trying to lose weight, are they going to successfully lose weight? Yes, absolutely. It's going to be still dictated by their calories. Because they're eating this enormous pile of vegetables, it might even handle the hunger aspects of the low satiety foods. A lot of foods, though, as far as the negative health effects, some of them are caloric dependent, meaning a lot of those bad foods, the negative health effects don't appear when you're in a calorie deficit. Or even if you're not gaining weight or gaining body fat at all, a lot of times you don't see a lot of the negative effects. Things like dietary cholesterol, even just refined carbs. No, you're probably going to be okay in regard to that. However, the thing that you need to consider, there are foods that even in a calorie deficit, over time will have some negative effects, and that's going to be stuff like trans fats. So if you're eating a bunch of those foods and you check them and you're eating a significant amount of trans fats, even though you might be dieting and you might be in a small calorie deficit and losing weight, those trans fats themselves over time can become problematic for you. The same thing with excessive fructose intake. It might not manifest initially during that, but things like the potential fatty liver buildup, if you're consuming more than 50 grams of fructose a day, even though you're burning through it and you're eating large amounts of refined fructose or any fructose, you can still develop over time potential fatty liver. It still could affect, insulin resistance, things like that over time. So it is still a concern. So to answer the question, it really depends upon the content of your food. But as far as just there being some refined carbs in there being some extra cholesterol in there, but you're still in a calorie deficit and you're still consuming huge amounts of vegetables, fiber, vitamins, minerals, for the other half of your diet, you're probably going to be okay. But again, if it's a bunch of trans fats or excessive amounts of fructose, you're still going to see some potential negative health benefits, or I'm sorry, not benefits, but health consequences could manifest with chronic intake of it over time. All right, next question and last question of the week. Can you talk about the possible disadvantages of icing injuries and taking anti-inflammatories? Stan Efferding mentioned that they are bad for injury healing since inflammation is necessary and blood flow is important. All right, I'm going to keep this one short and sweet because I'm running out of time. I don't want this to turn into a 20-minute part 2 here. So in short, anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs, we have multiple studies on this in athletes, and if you're training, we'll count you as an athlete. What they have found is that they do not seem to impede injury healing, and they do not inhibit muscle gains or muscle protein synthesis. There was a concern from some early studies that they might, but it turns out that they do not, and so they don't interfere with your gains. But the other question becomes, if you're taking them for injuries, that's one thing. If you're taking NSAIDs because you're getting consistent training pain, you might want to reassess how you're training instead of using a crutch. But injuries, perfectly acceptable. Icing injuries, on the other hand, even though a lot of coaches and people still do it, icing injuries has been found to slow down their recovery. Yeah, that is true, because icing an injury restricts blood flow. That restriction of that blood flow will slow down the healing of that injury a bit. So it's not ideal. However, icing of certain injuries is a requirement, meaning if you have an immediate injury that's not going to heal on its own, because let's be honest here, if you tear a muscle, that is probably not going to necessarily just heal on its own. A major tear that requires surgery, you need to ice that sucker immediately. And the same thing with a broken bone. You get a broken bone, you need to ice it. And here's the reason for that. Because your doctor is who's going to have to set everything. If you take that to a doctor and you've brought the swelling down through the icing, because that's what you're doing, you're reducing the swelling. So a swelling injury needs to be iced to get the swelling itself under control. And that will make your doctor's job easier. When he has to go in a couple of days and reattach that tendon, his job's going to be so much easier if the swelling is down. It's going to make it easier, your chances of recovery better. If you've broken a bone, again, getting that swelling under control is going to help the doctor set that bone easier and put a good cast on it easier. It's going to make things easier for you when you get to the doctor, and it's going to make his job easier, and that's going to make your healing easier. But as far as icing injuries that are not swelling, it's a bad idea because it is going to inhibit recovery. So it's kind of not a straightforward yes or no answer. It depends on the specific type of injury and if there's swelling or not, if a doctor is going to have to work on it or not. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.